Wow, I wish I could bottle some of this energy and take it back to some of the things I'm involved in. So we hope you're having good conversations. Three things are going to happen this afternoon. In a moment, we are looking at our fourth session, which is about responsive environments, sensors and all the rest of it, and how are we using those to support the needs of citizens or not, and what's going on in that area. Then what we're going to do is we're going to set you an opportunity for you to have a focused conversation with a group of people downstairs. And we're kind of going to set a challenge, an innovation challenge, but more of that a little bit later. Then we're going to come back for a high energy closure, including connecting this with what's going on with the upcoming Habitat 3 conference. So all this discussion is part of things feeding into some major global discussions related to cities and futures there. And then we're going to have a small glass of something acceptable to finish the afternoon off. So that's the plan. What we'd like to do now is continuing with our four themes, the final theme around responsive environments. So the bits are producing ways of sensing, understanding what's going on, that is trying to offer us possibilities of better, we hope, serve the needs of citizens in cities. I've got four people offering their take, their experience around this agenda. They'll each give us about 5 minutes, and then we'll have a good conversation around the issue of responsive environments. Going to start, first of all, delighted to welcome to the platform Zia Khan, who's Vice President of the Rockefeller Foundation and doing some interesting work in this field. Also, you're part of the Future of Cities work within the Global Agenda Council, so ideally qualified to offer a few thoughts from your experience on this topic. So great to have you with us.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. And is there a clicker here? Oh, no, thank you. So I'm not sure if, here we go. There we go. Thank you. So it's great to be here, and I regret that I wasn't able to join earlier today, but over lunch I heard so many fascinating conversations about what's been transpiring. I'm Zia Khan. I'm a vice president at the Rockefeller Foundation, which is a philanthropy. It's been around for over 100 years. Our overarching goals are around building resilience and inclusive economies, and we tend to focus on poor and vulnerable people. And that's actually what I want to talk about here, which is the role of people and humans in these responsive environments that we're talking about. And I want to do this by just telling a few quick stories to set the theme and to give us some input into the conversation that we'll have later. So the first theme is around don't forget the responding when it comes to responsive environments. So usually we talk about sensors and getting data, but we have to think about what is the people system? How are people going to be accountable? How are they going to make decisions? How are they going to actually go and do something? And that's a critical element when designing a responsive environment. So here what I have on the slide is, you may have heard in New York City, the police department about 10, 15 years ago rolled out this program called CompStat, where they get very detailed information of crimes that are happening at the precinct level. And they just rolled out CompStat 2.0, which is available to all citizens now. So you would think by just getting this detailed information, a lot of things would happen. But the key element of CompStat, what makes it work, is that people are watching. And here's a picture of the mayor looking at all this data. And the way CompStat works is that 200 senior police leaders will sit in a room and have the precinct commander stand at a podium and answer questions around what is happening in their precinct. So this is an example of how you combine the data system and the information system, but you have to marry it to a people process where there's actual meetings happening, where people are accountable and they're responding and making decisions. So this is a little bit about don't forget the respond in responsive. The second story I want to tell is about how we can use data in emergency situations. So the CompStat's about a day-to-day running of a city. And here's a picture of some of the devastation that happened when Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines. It was one of the biggest storms ever recorded in history. And there's a data company, Palantir, which does a range of activities. But one of the things that they've started to do is to use their data platform in these kinds of emergency situations, so emergency responders can respond much more quickly and precisely than they could before. So they have a platform. And for example, in the Philippines, what happened is there was a group called Direct Relief. And they were able to go into, using the data platform and feeding into the data platform, they were able to go into hospitals, track the number of patients, track the amount of medication that was available, so that the health system that was already in place and that was designed for day-to-day operations all of a sudden became much more capable and much more responsive in this emergency situation. So in this way, the way that data can help enhance existing capabilities, this helps build the resilience of a city and an environment. And in our parlance, resilience is the ability to prepare for, to survive, and even thrive after there is an acute shock, like a hurricane, or even in some cases, a slow change, like an economic transformation or something like that. And that's actually the last story that I want to take, which is these responses can take different scales and happen over different scales. We're often used to thinking about the speed at which these sensors can provide information and feed into these decision-making systems. And I'll tell a little example where we didn't use technology, and I'll leave it as an open question as to how we might have. So another big storm that hit New York City, Superstorm Sandy, happened, and the Department for Housing and Urban Development allocated about $1 billion to go towards rebuilding in New York City. And we at the Rockefeller Foundation wanted to make sure that what was getting rebuilt wasn't just building what was there before, but that we could take what we learned and build for a future scenario where we're going to experience more storms and even sea level rise. So we funded a competition where we got knowledge and insights from around the world, brought engineers and architects together, and importantly, worked with local communities, particularly the poor communities that often reside around the water in the lower side of Manhattan, which is depicted here, to come up with some innovative designs. And one of the winning proposals is what's shown here. It's called the Big U. It's a design of 10 miles, basically, of greenbelt around Manhattan. And one of the important things is that this can help with future hurricanes in terms of absorbing some of the sea level, the waves and the flooding that happens. But because we got input from the local community, it also provides park space that was desperately needed, that city officials actually didn't realize until they heard their voices. So the question I pose to this group is, we did this the old-fashioned way in terms of bringing people together, having meetings. It took quite a while. What would it look like to build technology and sensors so we could get information into these problem-solving processes, particularly where we can hear the voices of people who are often excluded from these conversations? So with that, thank you very much, and look forward to the conversation and the other speeches.
Thank you very much indeed. Some very interesting applications there for us to develop the conversation around. Next, delighted to welcome to the platform the Mayor of the City of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi. Great to have you with us. We're fantastic. And I know you're doing an extraordinary amount of innovative work in Calgary. It's great to have you with us to offer maybe one or two thoughts and clues as to how you as a city mayor are wrestling with creating responsive environments for your citizens. So good to have you with us.
All right, there we go. Well, thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be here with all of you today to talk a little bit about good data driving good decisions. And I want to say a special hello to Jean Clos, the former mayor of the great city of Barcelona, from whom we have learned so very much. So I really do want to talk to you about data, but I figured we're here at MIT. I may as well talk about technical things because surely no one at MIT ever talks about technical things or knows anything about them. So I may as well make myself look smart. By the way, I went to school just down the river at that not so good university. And I was always scared to step foot on this campus. So like many modern cities, the city of Calgary uses sensors, an array of sensors to collect data on how our services work, on the external environment, whether they're embedded in the ground, in roads and pathways, whether they're located on lampposts, streetlights, buildings, whether there are cameras or GPS units in vehicles, and on people, all networked directly or wirelessly. But I'll give you a preview of where I go. I'm going to talk a little bit about physical sensors, but I'm going to talk also about the most important way that we can gather data from our community, and that is, in fact, in my case, to use the 1.2 million sensors we have, which are the people that live in the community. So we collect data in a variety of ways, as you can see here, doing many different things. I'll give you some examples. Along major routes, we have travel time display boards that you can also see on your mobile device, not while you're driving, please, that will tell you how long it is to get to certain destinations. Those use the unique Bluetooth identifier on your phone or in your car. We don't capture personal data, but we know how long it took for that Bluetooth address to get from point A to point B, and we display that in real time on the streets, hopefully, to help people make decisions on the kinds of things we do. Wireless queue detection at intersections to improve signal timing in real time. One of my favorites is parking sensors to monitor parking usage in different city parking facilities, which helps you because you know whether there's a spot before you enter the garage and start driving around, but also helps us determine where more parking facilities are needed. By the way, our parking authority works with those Bluetooth time sensors now, so that as you're leaving the parking garage in the afternoon, there will be a sign at the exit that says how long it'll take you to get to certain intersections at that time of day, and just turn around and go have a coffee. You'll get there quicker. I want to give you two quick examples. Number one has to do with everyone's favorite topic, cycling. So while we are seeing a renaissance in cycling in many, many cities, we must also recognize that everyone who is not a cyclist hates cyclists with a passion of a burning 1,000 suns, something I have never truly understood. So in Calgary, we have recently installed a system of downtown separated from traffic cycle tracks. You can see pictures of them there. But this was a very, very controversial decision for many, many reasons. And I believe that good data makes good decisions, so we needed better data. So you'll notice, and you can see it really well in the top photo on your left there, that the cycle tracks are temporary. There's no permanent infrastructure in there. And they were put in for a year to determine whether or not, over 4 seasons in a 4-season city, people were actually using them, and we are measuring how many cyclists go by them, what the average travel time of cars is, whether that has changed, what's happened to the pedestrian environment, what is happening to the businesses along the track, whether they are gaining or losing services, and what is happening to parking, as well as a whole bunch of other things. But it's a very sincere experiment. We're going to do it, and a year from now, we will determine whether the costs of the cycle tracks are worth the benefits. And we'll have that conversation in a very big way. But we're doing that through a whole bunch of real-time sensor technology. What you see here are real-time counters. You can go on the web right now and see how many people went past that sensor today. Yes, the cyclists drive back and forth in front of the sensor to make the numbers go higher. That's why there are cameras there as well. But in fact, we are seeing that one of our metrics was we had to triple cycle traffic along these routes, and that happened in the first month. So we are seeing extraordinary take-up of this, but we can actually show the skeptics every single day. People will often tweet me and say, I went by the cycle track today and I didn't see a single bike. And my response always is, go to this website and you'll see precisely how many bikes were on that cycle track today. So it's data-driven, it works well, and it'll give us the information we need to make a decision about it. Just see some of the things here. Bicycle monitoring, you don't need to know all of that. Taxi regulation. Not going to talk about Uber, but I will say that we can regulate taxis in a smarter way using data. Every single taxi has a GPS in it. So why can't we collect the data to figure out what is going on at peak times, where the peaks really are, and where our taxi system needs to be able to do this? So we do that. And we monitor supply, demand. We figure out what times people use it, where they are. Apparently on Saturday nights, you want to be at Craft, followed by the Ship and Anchor, followed by the 1410 Beer House. But this all is about helping us understand things better. And one of the things we learned is that at those peak times on Saturday and Friday nights, up to 1/3 of the taxis were not actually in service. So our new taxi licenses have a requirement on them that you must drive during peak times, which could change over time as we gather the data. Now, all of that said, there are lots and lots of different ways in which we do this work. Oh, there you go. Those are all the bars. In case you are visiting Calgary. If you want to be at a busy place, go to Craft. Less busy, go to Vinyl, apparently. Most visited site on the city's website, and this is the app version of it, is the Calgary roads. So you'll see that there are traffic cameras. You click on the camera, you see a real-time picture. You'll see it shows you where there are construction delays. Those Bluetooth travel time things I talked about before are eligible in there. And you see the location of every single, at this time of year, street cleaning vehicle. In the winter, you see the location of every plow after a snowstorm. When this was first launched, I said to my staff, why did you do this? This is not useful information for people to make decisions. Nobody is going to say, oh, the snowplow is down the street, I'll wait. This is the most visited page on the city website, particularly after a snowstorm. People love to know the snowplows are there. They just love to know they exist. And they give them information in the long term. Similarly, the Bluetooth travel time stuff, ideally we put those signs before the exit so that you know if there's a traffic jam in front, you can exit off. Sometimes we put them after the exit, so they just let you know you'll be a while, which is less useful. But people will change their timing over time because they can have access to this data and they can know, you know, this particular route that I take home is really busy from 4 to 4:20. So if I stay at work an extra 10 minutes, I can probably avoid that traffic. And that, in fact, is good for everyone. Of course, we do that through a citizen dashboard that nobody ever looks at. That's another issue that we can talk about data, but it's nice to know it's there. Last thing I want to say, though, the most important thing, is I believe that good decisions come from good data, and good data comes from expert opinion. I happen to love public transit. I love buses and trains, and I take the Silver Line from Logan when I come here, and I'm amazed at how they branded it as a train. Although it's a bus, it's great. You learn so much. And I've got people that work with me. We're doing exactly the same thing, don't laugh. I've got people that work with me who are transportation engineers and network route optimization people, people who understand marketing and fares, and people who know how to drive a bus or a train. But together, collectively, we are not, in fact, the experts in public transit. The expert in public transit, of course, is the person who takes the bus every day. She can tell you when the system is working, when it's not working, and what changes need to happen to make it better. So how do we listen to her? This is a 311 app. It was revolutionary when we launched it. Everyone's got one now. I looked at it just now before we came, and someone is complaining about flying black ants invading their neighborhood. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do about it. But the whole idea here is the real sensors are not the little boxes that are connected to Wi-Fi. The real sensors are the 1.2 million people who live in the city. And if they see an act of their citizenship is to share information about their neighborhood, to give us their best advice on how the community can be better, that's when we've succeeded. So the 311 app works, not because it's great technology and you can take a picture of your pothole that's geotagged and send it in right away. The 311 app works because people care enough to do that. And so we have to think hard about the behavioral things that really help people feel like they're part of a community, that they are in fact citizens, and that they want to generously share what they know with the community. And that's when sensors are effective, and I am way over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. Very interesting stuff. Okay, our next presentation. One thing we've hardly talked about at all today is cities are flows of stuff. We buy loads of stuff, we consume loads of stuff, and then somehow we spend half our taxes on the brain, getting someone to dispose of the stuff. And if we feel good, we do a little bit of recycling. Extraordinary flows of stuff. And we kind of accept it and pay high taxes because that's what happens. But there's some new thinking going on around there. And I'm delighted that we're joined by Tom Zaki, who's founder and chief executive of TerraCycle, which isn't just finding the juicy bits to recycling and making more money out of it, but is actually targeting the bits that no one else wants to recycle or are difficult to recycle. So to get a take on stuff, circular economy, city futures, bits and bricks, please welcome to the platform, Tom.
Thank you. This is a little bit of a background. What we do at TerraCycle is we recycle the non-recyclable. And to give a sense, we operate primarily in developed countries because one of the things we've learned about waste is that it's a luxury of a solution. First you need roads, then healthcare, then other aspects, and then waste gets tackled. And the other reason that waste is a luxury if we think about it, is that the entire solution to garbage comes from economics. The reason garbage exists, and it's important to understand that garbage is a very, very new idea. It's only about 100 years old in the modern context, is because we make things from exceptionally complex materials nature has no systems to handle, and those materials are consumed at a ferocious rate. And the wealthier a city becomes, the more waste is produced. And in fact, when people move from rural areas to urban areas, waste goes up as well. Today, still 25% of our waste ends up in oceans, whether from developing or developed markets. 5% globally is recycled. And then primarily 70% of the waste in the world is either burned or buried, ideally with some energy recovery if you're burning it. Where we see incineration relatively high are countries like Germany, Japan, and it's emerging in other markets like Canada, for example. Now, the real answer to waste is a question of design, and not just designing the product, but rethinking the consumption of the product. Now, that can happen either through societal changes, making different things desirable, or through legal changes, not allowing certain things to be purchased whatsoever. The way to basically do this is to move from disposable to durable consumption, and ideally to limit consumption altogether, because if you actually look at every environmental issue in the world, whether it's deforestation, air quality, water quality, waste itself, it's all linked to hyperconsumption, all of it. Now, the other really interesting aspect in waste is what makes something recyclable or non-recyclable, it turns out is actually not the technical capacity of the waste. At TerraCycle, we've been able to solve everything from cigarette butts to chewing gum to latex gloves, dirty diapers, and you name it. We've actually never seen a waste stream that can't be circularly processed. But it's a question of economics. The things on the, in the green circle are the generally recyclable objects around the world, aluminum being the #1 item. Why is aluminum so recyclable? It's because it's exceptionally valuable. And you can make money as a hauler. After the cost of collection and processing, you still have profits. And the business of recycling is a business. It's not a charity. And if you look at the United States, for example, because oil has gotten incredibly cheap, and because China has stopped importing a lot of America's recyclables, which is where most of them were ending up, American recycling rates today are crashing. Waste Management, the largest garbage company in the United States, has closed in the past 2 years. 25% of America's recycling infrastructure is simply gone. And that's because of the economic challenge. And there's a good news in this, is that the way to solve everything that isn't recyclable is just economics. It's not a technical challenge. And that becomes the magic of unlocking the solution if we can't solve it from a design point of view right away. Now, everything can go through circular processes. The best circular process is reuse. We see that very frequently in things like clothing, electronics, textiles, high-value goods, typically going from developed markets to developing markets where there's markets for those. But reuse can be other things. Here's an example of how we packaged 40 million plants last year, just direct reuse of margarine packaging. Upcycling is something we hear a lot about. There's many companies involved in the world of upcycling. That's where you put something into a different context. But both reuse and upcycling are things that are very limited in volume. You only can do so much of this. So the fundamental answer to waste is the concept of recycling, where we are able to break materials apart and get them back into the overall systems, whether this guy here who's made entirely from used potato chip bags, or cigarette waste, which can now be shredded, separating the organics, composting those, and taking the filter and making it into the type of objects you see. Now, the big white elephant in the room here is, of course, the answer to cigarette waste or any waste is don't smoke, and there'll never be a cigarette butt on the street. But still today, 20% of the global population smokes. Now, one of the important things that we found in working with nations as well as cities is that there is a phenomenal desire by consumers to get involved. The real issue is a fundamental lack of infrastructure, either companies not offering services or a very hard way to find services. So the people are there, and especially in markets where recycling is relatively emerging, like take Argentina, for example. In Buenos Aires, recycling is still relatively weak, but the desire of the public to recycle is even higher than in markets like Switzerland, which are very advanced markets in the world of recycling. So there's great demand. It's all a question of is there availability to do so. I want to show you just two case studies before ending. The thing to think about in waste is to rethink the infrastructure. And there's many great ways to do this. You know, people always say the trick to garbage is separate it, but will people separate into 100 different fragments to really get everything recycled? There's many different places to do this. Retailers are a great example. 70,000 retailers. This is a partnership we have with DM, which is a pharmacy in Germany. We manage this platform for them where consumers can bring in everything from aerosol cans to light bulbs, and it turns out that select fractions are very, very well collected inside retailers. Here's some other examples of different versions of these units. Now moving to cities specifically. One of the biggest challenges cities have are litter, whether it's chewing gum or cigarette butts, making actually the two most littered waste streams. And there's a direct correlation with litter and tourism rates. The less litter, people feel safer, and tourism rates go up. And there's an interesting psychology that we learned about this. We started this platform, cigarette recycling through cities, actually in the city of Vancouver in Canada, and now it's rolled out to about 40 major cities around the world, from Sydney to Paris and other major markets. Many cities have had for a very long time cigarette disposal points. These are areas that if you smoke, you can put your cigarette and have it disposed. But then a smoker is choosing between two negatives, the negative of litter or the negative of landfill. And it doesn't really work that well. You end up seeing litter right beside these units. But when they move to a cigarette recycling station, it's the same unit, just now a new sticker, and of course a different back-end solution, the rate of cigarette recycling, for example, in the city of Vancouver went down 99% within a 10 meter. 10 meters is a relatively big radius from these units, and that's because consumers were inspired by choosing between negatives and positives. So there's a big psychology question around how to solve waste, but of course it's also a question of how do we encourage consumers to choose properly and ideally never need these systems whatsoever. Thank you.
Great stuff. Very interesting. Okay, and our final contribution before we open up the conversation comes from Adam Green, Strategic Partnerships Lead at the Exploratorium in San Francisco, which I think is a place with an inquiring mind about new ways of thinking about urban futures, all the rest of it. You'll explain it better, and maybe some of the things related to responsive environments. So great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, thanks so much. This is exciting to be here. So as mentioned, I'm from the Exploratorium. How many people in here have heard of the Exploratorium quickly? Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, great, because I only got 5 minutes. I only got 5 minutes, so I'll keep it quick. But essentially, the Exploratorium was founded to support people's understanding their very fundamental learning processes. So this means helping them have confidence in asking questions and supporting the follow-up of those questions, testing the questions. That was the pedagogy of it. Essentially, in short, what we did is instead of telling people what to think, we give them the ability to think for themselves. That's really what we're doing. So about 10 years ago, we started to take this from inside the museum walls out into civic spaces. So this is inside the museum, but more recently we've been moving to parks. This is a national park in northern San Francisco, into streets. This is a parklet outside of a middle school that has educational exhibits inside of it, and plazas. Now, so I wanted to take the opportunity, having all of these big brains here, so many inspiring people saying so many things, to be a little bit provocative. So bear with me, okay? Smart cities can still be dumb. All right? So think about this. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that the very nature of the size of the data that we're dealing with, the infrastructure, the scale of it, the danger is that it actually becomes disconnected from the communities that it's impacting. So if we don't utilize the indigenous resources of those communities to help synthesize that big data, we're missing a fundamental component of what makes successful design. And I want to use a quick example of a strategy that the Exploratorium, as we're doing this work, connects the big with the small. This is Buchanan Mall. It's a 5-block park in the Western Addition district of San Francisco. It used to be a vibrant hub in the Fillmore Jazz Center. But a little while ago, back in the 70s, through poor planning, policy, other things, set up this downward spiral, and now it is the highest crime and murder rate in the city. So we were approached by a local social enterprise to help revitalize this park. This is Green Streets. They do landfill diversion. And doing this, we partnered with other key groups to make sure that we had a robust team to really address the needs of the community. Trust for Public Land, who had amassed massive amounts of data about this park. And also Citizen Film, a documentary film company that actually would go out there and get the stories, document this whole process. And we knew that for the success of this project, we couldn't just have the community participating. They had to own it. They had to have real ownership of this project. So our design director, Josh Bacigalupi, who's sitting in the audience, worked to set a framework where the engagement process itself could be generative. And our team would really just help support the necessary synthesis and documentation for what was being generated. So we started with sketch sessions. We gathered up a task force of elders, youth, local experts, and we ran them through all these exercises. This is 2D site planning. We did 3D model making, prototyping at scale, prototyping in the community, design build itself, leading to an outcome of an actual project. The result was that we connected the community back to their space. What that means is that this has gained a momentum. This has gained the momentum that now they are participating in their civic environment, and they are, as the mayor said, they are the sensors, and they're now giving that feedback. So here's the challenge based on that earlier provocation. I would invite all of us to join in thinking about how we make sure that the tools and data sets that everybody here is developing can be not just in service of communities themselves, but grounded by the local experts. This is how we're going to maximize the efforts of our bits and bricks, because as the sociologist Robert Parks said, the freedom to make and remake our cities and ourselves is one of the most precious and neglected of our human rights. So let's make sure we're supporting that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Adam. So again, much food for thought. What I'd like to do is just give you the chance, just kind of have a relax, have a chat to someone next to you, what's grabbing you from this, and then I'll bring our panel up here and we'll see what this is telling us in terms of the bricks and bits challenge. Okay, so our last turn of the wheel in terms of our four major themes, this one around responsive environments, 4 different presentations, some common interesting messages coming out. Again, I'm happy to initially take the cue from yourselves, or I've got a shed load of things I'd like to ask. I'll go there initially.
Daniel Cheburo, Philips Lighting Research. My question is actually to the mayor. You made a fantastic presentation in terms of how you use data and sensors to either make decisions or just for information to your citizens. But most often we come to a situation where how do you value those information? How do you make a dollar value when you install something? So earlier this morning you also asked about CapEx versus OpEx, and how do you also finance those things? If you can give us some insight.
A terrific question, 2 questions, both are great. The question of value is very confusing because as I said, I was talking fast, but as I said, when we put up the map with all the snowplows, to me, good information yields to decision making, not just for government, but for citizens. And that map really doesn't help anyone with decision making. But it does make people feel as though the city is responsive to things that are important to them. So the part I didn't get into is that here in the city of Boston, they use the exact same 311 app as us. In fact, they're identical. But they've added a new module, which is when we close a 311 request, ours just says closed. And they, focusing on some research over at Harvard Business School, actually get the person who filled the pothole to take a photo of the repair and put it up on the app. And so the feedback loop becomes very interesting. And the reason the feedback loop becomes very interesting is because when people see that their action of citizenship had an impact, they are more likely to be able to want to participate again and do more things like that, which is a good thing. By the way, I was in the mayor's office in Boston yesterday, and I learned that they actually are experimenting with something even newer. They think the key is not seeing the pothole being filled, it's seeing Jennifer, the road crew worker, filling the pothole. So they actually take a picture of her so that the citizen also sees there's a real human being who is acting on their concerns. So this is marginal stuff, but there's value to it. And at some point we have to figure out how we determine that value, because we can measure everything all day. Cities have millions, literally millions of data points. And so the question then becomes, which is the most powerful and useful data? It's the same big data question everybody has of how we move forward. The CapEx, OpEx question, I just want to say one last quick thing about that. If I can figure out ways to make capital expenditures that save me money on my operating side in the long run, that's what I want to do. So you're from Philips, so we accelerated our streetlight replacement program from high pressure sodium to LED from a 40-year program to a 4-year program, because I have an incredibly fast payback on that on energy bills. That's a great thing. But if the plan is to use a platform to take my one-time money and turn it into ongoing capital operating cost, that's where, for private business, that can often be a very good thing to do. It cleans up your balance sheet and so on. For government, it's often the opposite, that I would much rather pay the money up front and reduce my operating expenses over time than vice versa.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, that's where we're right at the front.
Thank you. I think all of the talks now...
You are?
I'm Carlos Gershenson from the Sensible City Lab. All the talks were related with citizen participation. I would like to ask each speaker briefly, like, advice on do's and don'ts for promoting citizen participation.
Okay, so your top 2 do's and don'ts on citizen participation based on your experience. Mm-hmm. Can we start with Zia at the far end?
Sure. You know, what I'll share is when you're trying to change a system like an urban system, you have to think of both the rules and the rituals. And the rules are sort of the technologies and the processes and the data. And the rituals, and I think the mayor gave a good example, are the emotional aspects, the pride that people take, the commitment, the values that they have. That's what actually motivates behavior. So if you can do examples, and I think that taking a picture of Jennifer fixing the pothole is fantastic because it builds her pride in what she does. If you can think about how can you tap people's sources of pride and how can you animate that, that I think is what really motivates behaviors.
Okay.
Top 2 real fast. Number 1, old rule of governance, go to people where they live. Don't expect them to come to you. So make sure that you are out in the community where people are participating in community when you want to get their feedback and their ideas from them. Understanding too that a lot of people live online and making the technological aspect of that very easy. Number 2, empower people to use their hands and their voices to solve problems themselves. Very, very quickly, people can look it up. We have a social movement that I helped start in Calgary called 3 Things for Calgary. It's totally open source, steal it, use it in your own community. All it is this, encouraging every citizen every year to do 3 things for the community. You don't tell them what to do, you don't tell them how to do it. We let people answer 2 simple questions. What am I good at? What am I passionate about? And when they do it, they come up with incredible, tiny and giant things to change the community. So it unleashes their own creativity. And my job as someone who has a microphone is to sort of set the expectation, to set the table, to say, this is what we do. And everyone should think about what their 3 things are. And that kind of idea really allows people not to sit around and say, there are flying ants in my neighborhood, government, come fix it. But it's actually to determine whether the flying ants are really a problem. And if so, what do I do about it so that the kid next door who's allergic doesn't get stung?
Okay, thanks. Adam.
Yeah, to go off that, go to the place. You know, doing the work in the community is vital. We work a lot in low-income communities, and So I think the biggest don't is don't presume. People talk a lot about cultural competency when doing work in other communities. I actually don't like that word. Competency is kind of that old anthropological way of, oh, I'll understand it and then I'll figure out what you need. I like to think of it, and we like to think of it more as cultural humbleness, to come in and actually have the openness to respond. I mean, talk about a responsive environment, to respond to what's going on there. I think one of the other things that we found in terms of getting engagement is do leave room for compensation and incentivizing the folks for participating. You know, to go into these communities and say, you got plenty of time, you know, come volunteer your brain power that other people might expect to get paid for quite a bit, and just volunteer it and give it to us for free, and then we'll come and help fix your community or something like that. So leaving room to compensate and incentivize that participation at an equally respectful level so that you're getting those local experts, the other little mayors of each of those communities to participate, that would be my big ones.
Tom.
We deal a lot when we work with cities to think about the psychology of behavior. And we're hyper-focused on the concept of waste, so I'll give you this particular example in that context. People are not motivated, in fact demotivated, when they're facing negatives. When you communicate fines around littering or the environmental destruction littering produces versus the opposite of recycling and so on. So a very quick example of this. We did a study which was commissioned in this case by Pepsi, but we've been using it in large venues and cities. Or we took basically a waste bin or a rubbish bin and put it out into a high traffic area, littered a lot of litter around it. And that was the starting point. And looked at how many people who did not litter the waste, random people walking by, would pick up someone else's waste and put it in the bin, act as a good Samaritan. And it was about 1 or 2 in 100 would do so. Then when we start putting out signs that say litter fines, it actually went down. Because people, when we surveyed them, didn't want to be associated with the person who's littering by any, and at all be mistaken for someone who had done that. And the same occurred when we put up signs that said littering is horrible for the environment, causes all sorts of negatives. In fact, that sort of messaging drove the Good Samaritan practice down. Now, the opposite happened when we took that waste bin. We just put a recycling logo on it. Of course, now it became a recycling bin. It went from 1 to 2 to closer to 5 to 7 people of 100 would pick up someone else's waste and put it in. Then there was a really interesting finding, which is then we took one step further. And this is the real magic, I think, of creating behavior, is we created delight. In this example, we took the waste bin and we simply put in a gamification aspect, which once you put in the piece of waste, like this aluminum can, it triggered either a light saying thank you so much, it popped up like a little arcade example, or even a sound, one example being an infinite drop where you heard a sound that went whoo, and then it said it's the world's deepest recycling bin. Point is, that drove it up another 3x over the recycling rates. People were running around picking up litter just to get the benefit of the response. No coupons, no direct money or any. You didn't have to pay them like a reverse vending machine or anything like that. Just the psychological reward of a smile. And it's really important to think about this because many times in that space, but in other examples, we scare people and hope that that's going to create response, when in fact we have to delight people, and you're going to get exponentially more positive response.
Okay, thank you very much. I had a whole set as well because I do a lot of participation. I mean, just one from me is you can't empower people to do anything. People empower themselves. So you've really got to create the conditions where people feel the comfort, the desire to do things. And so often we impose an empowerment process when in fact you just have to create the conditions where people choose to empower themselves. And also process does take time. It doesn't always take time, but we think it's a participative process or quick on the cheap. It's a major investment to do it really properly, often with people with the skills to be able to support and enable people. Anyway, there's a few ideas. I'll take another couple of thoughts. Yeah, gentleman here.
Bob Brammer Technology. There's a question for our TerraCycle colleague. Can you comment on the possibilities for improving electronic waste recycling? The current state of the art causes a lot of security and environmental hazards.
Absolutely. Electronic waste is a key challenge. And you really have three distinct topics of electronic waste. The one we hear about all the time is really the high-end valuable electronics, electronics like an iPhone or a tablet or something that may have just broken. There's really good opportunities and actually quite strong security management in the refurbishment market. And the reason that security management is very strong is that if you resell one of these products at $100, you can have the money available to deal with all the data quite properly. The challenge, by the way, on that market is the developed markets, which are taking all these refurbished electronics, getting flooded by them. And there's overcapacity, or there's too much supply. And because of that, the value that you can get for these items is going down quite aggressively, which will then compromise the question of how much money can you invest to properly deal with the data. Now, the other areas of e-waste that are less spoken about are the packaging. A lot of electronic product packaging is not recyclable itself. And then especially the negative value e-waste, the e-waste that costs more and cannot be refurbished. These are like keyboards or mice that people don't use in the same way that they did today. The challenge there becomes it's one of cost. How do you, who's going to pay the bill to create the collection and the solution around these materials? One way to do that is to deem them hazardous, and so you force the, just sort of like paint or other batteries have legislation that forces proper collection. The other side is, again, to look at how is that object consumed, because right now one of the key drivers, if you look at most electronics, they're made to break. They're made to, so that you cycle through them relatively quickly. That drives the business. So I think you have to look at it on both sides, but the key aspect is to look at the areas that most functions don't look at, which is all this negative value material. The solutions are there. It's truly just a question of cost.
Right. Okay. Just a question for the Mayor. Nahid, I'm just interested whether you're clearly developing a responsive environment in Calgary, but just the interesting thing, are you seeing a development of a tale of two cities? So there are those who like it and engage and can use the apps and all the stuff, and there's a set of people, for whatever reason, that either don't and are either not aware of some of the stuff that's happening, or you create a discomfort in the city. There are those who are in the party and those who are not. Is that an issue at all?
Well, of course, you're always going to have a situation where the vast, vast majority of people are unimpacted and unaffected by this. But I don't know that that's necessarily a problem, because as long as the barrier to entry is very, very low, and anyone who wants to participate can participate in whatever way they want to, but as well as the benefits are accruable to everyone. That's the important part. Right. So, another example I'll give you is one thing I'm very happy about is we finally have GPS trackers on all of our buses. And so that means that anybody with a mobile device can know in real time when the next bus is coming. And if it's raining or snowing outside, especially when you're going home, less so when you're going to work in their school in the morning, but when you're going home, it fundamentally changes the nature of your relationship with the transit system. It's much less something that I'm waiting for, it's more something that is responsive to me. Yeah. And so whether or not you were part of the discussion around how that happened, the point is you have access to that. Right. And every bus stop says text to this number to know when the real time when the bus is coming. Problem is when it doesn't work, it's a very big problem. Because you've set expectations extremely high. So that, to me, is the real danger here. It's less about a digital divide or a non-digital divide among the population. The real problem is you've set the bar high. And so as a civic government, you have to be able to reach that bar.
Right, okay. And presumably the ultimate app is the one that not only tells where the buses are, but also where the snow plows are, so you can work out why the delay in your bus. Yeah. So, did you have a thought on this?
I wanted to actually just follow up on one other point on e-waste. That's a very interesting opportunity if you are involved in managing a city. We did this with the city of Toronto in Canada, which is in that profitable e-waste category. One of the key challenges is having people actually recover it out of their homes. And so the concept was giving a bag to everyone on one day of the year where people could just put in their profitable electronic devices, which again are like cell phones, tablets, that sort of thing, and to put that directly into the recycling bin. In Toronto, that would be the blue bin, and asked the hauler, the waste management company, just sort out those bags on one day. So it's very easy supply chain. And it generated millions of profit dollars because it focused on the profitable items, got them out of the home in a way that's really clean and simple. This method could actually be used for a lot of the other highly inventoried waste streams at home, whether it's paint, it's one of the most highly inventoried items, bathroom waste, these sort of things, is do one moment and generate a lot of revenue out of it. And you can generate revenue on e-waste, but also clothing, toys. Those items will generate sheer profit dollars because they can be refurbished, and there's great vendors who can manage that for you.
So that's responsive environments. There's another one which was a street share one, which says for one day you can put out on the street anything that you kind of want to, you no longer need, and then everyone can go to each other and just kind of take what they want, and anything that's left will be collected, and it's a great way of finding out what your neighbours are up to, apart from anything else. But it maybe is part of the joy, the creativity of something about neighbourhood. So there's maybe something happening here which is beyond just. There's a gentleman in the centre here. Very good. That's your job. That's good.
Thanks. Hi, my name's Dave Adam from London. Company's called Global Cities. I've got a question about data and trust, probably specifically for Naheed, and what the experience is in building trust with citizens, what the opportunities are around data, and what the challenges there are. For instance, majority of people, I'm sure, when you talk about data in a national context, don't have that much faith in their governments to be able to manage that on their behalf. But at a civic level, is that any different? And is there an opportunity to re-engage people politically on this topic?
It's a really, really thoughtful question because we have two, and I'm going to speak very much from the Canadian perspective, we have two countervailing things going on here. Number one is people's very legitimate concerns around privacy, and the other is people's legitimate feeling that government having good data helps government do a better job. And I think those two things play against one another. You may know, you probably don't, but it's interesting that our previous government in Canada eliminated part of our census. And it was a very controversial discussion because what they ended up doing was they used an alternative form of collection that cost more money but was useless data. And as an academic turned politician, I was deeply offended by this. And the thing that made me cheer the most about our new Prime Minister is not how very good looking he is or how he can explain quantum computing, sort of, but the fact that they're reinstating the long form census. And this is something that was universally cheered across the population. So it's interesting that such an esoteric thing nonetheless resonated with people and said, yeah, that makes sense to me, that you need this good information to make good decisions. And it's a conversation that I have all the time. You know, someone asked me about those Bluetooth travel things. Well, aren't people concerned? Because in theory, you could actually figure out where an individual device was going and how often they travel there and so on and so on. I have never once had a complaint about that. And my sense is that in this day and age where Google Photos can make a photo album on your vacation showing exactly where you went and a film out of it without any interaction whatsoever on your part, people have resigned themselves in some way to a certain loss of that kind of privacy when the benefit is clear. And bluntly, the city would have no idea how to use that Bluetooth information to track anybody in any way because there's too much of it. And so I think the anonymity that comes from the very, very big data is also helpful in this regard.
Does anyone else on the panel just want to comment on this question about data, trust, intrusion, all the rest of it? We're becoming a sensed environment. Anyone else just got any observation?
Well, it's an interesting question. It doesn't quite get at the issue that you're pointing at, but I'll tell a quick anecdote. In Nairobi, for example, one of the largest slums in Nairobi would show up on a city map as a forest, and it was just easily ignored in that way. And so they started to actually map, and it's for people who mobilize slum dweller organizations, actually mapping people and where their homes are is an important step. And at first, people would be very nervous about that because they don't want to know if they want to show up on a map or be known. But it actually creates visibility, and in a way, it gives voice as well. So it's an interesting tension. We're all wrestling with this of what to do with trust, but there's something about data that, in our line of work where we focus particularly on poor, vulnerable people, where it gives them more voice and therefore they can participate in data-oriented processes that everyone else is participating, but they aren't. And so that's something that we think a lot about.
Okay. Just anyone else, just on this issue of data and trust and sensors and all the rest of it, either anyone's got an observation or a thought on this particular issue? Is it on this issue or a different issue?
No, it's about this issue, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I am interested to
You
asking
are?
Joan Clos from UN Habitat. I am just interested on asking the mayor, what are your main issues or problems in Calgary, a rich city in the development world? What are your main headaches or the ones that you can explain in public? And what do you, how do you think that big data or bids or whatever are relevant to your first three biggest problems in the city?
Okay, how much time have we got?
Okay, 5
Whole
minutes,
other
20
presentation.
seconds.
5 minutes, 20 seconds, just for
Yeah.
this.
Maybe we'll go for 1 minute, 20
Yeah,
seconds.
very, very blunt, very briefly. I am very lucky. I come from a place that is extraordinarily prosperous, that is extraordinarily well educated, and we never ever forget how lucky a people we are. Now that said, we are dealing with the global bust of commodity prices. My unemployment rate has gone in 18 months from 3.5% to 8.5%. My downtown office vacancy rate has gone from sub 2% to 30% over 18 months. Yet people keep moving there. And in fact, we are creating jobs right, left, and center. And as I always say, if we're this prosperous and this well educated, if we don't get this right, nobody in the world is going to get this right. That said, one of the interesting things about the municipal order of government in my reality is that when the economy is doing very well, the city is very poor. When the economy is doing very poorly, the city is very poor. So we have not figured out how we use fiscal tools to ensure that cities have the ability to provide the services, both the operating and the capital that is needed so that people can live good lives. I don't need to tell the head of Habitat that this is the first time in human history where more people live in cities than do not live in cities. And that will only continue. So these questions of urbanization, of how people live together in cities are very important ones, but you've got to have the money to do it. So where big data is most helpful for me is where it can reduce my operating budget. It sounds very reductionist, but if it helps me focus my very limited resources in places of higher impact, that's fundamentally the biggest value to me as a municipal politician.
Right. Okay. I just want to come back to this issue of sensing, data, and trust. I think there was just a comment over there related to that one.
Hi, I'm Andrew Sutton. I'm a land use attorney. I asked a question before. This is a question about big data. On a forward-looking basis, we know that the sensors are going to generate tremendous amounts of value, tremendous amounts of data about the built environment in real time. But looking backwards and historically, we already know that there's a tremendous amount of data about the built environment in registries, building files, studies, traffic studies that have already been done that basically canvass all of, you know, even if you look out that window of Boston, there's CAD files for all of those buildings. There's permit zoning, entitlements. That data is dumb and dark, and it's not interpreted, and it's not linked, and it's really difficult and expensive to mine. That's my job. To what extent do the sensorization of the urban environment obviate this data, or is this data necessary to further enhance the future big data that's going to be collected?
Okay. I think we'll take that. If anyone wants to add comment to that, fine.
Well, I would just say that it's been our experience that interacting with the big data and all of the other data, GIS data, all the CAD files, they are difficult to get through to actually get at what needs to happen. And you know, an anecdote of that project that I showed was there was a completely different psychogeography than any of the sensors or any of the other data in that area that we were supplied that showed. And this was about turf. This was about the community's perceptions of the different areas in that 5-block strip of lane where they could and couldn't go. So I think there is a role to play depending upon, you know, the scale and what you're trying to impact. But being cognizant of those gaps is, I think, also extremely important. and knowing how to fill them in.
Okay, I can take a couple more. There's a gentleman towards the front there, yeah. No, further forward. Keep coming forward. That's it.
My name is Ian MacDonald. I'm an architect from London. Converse to what we're talking about, we've been looking at a project where we take everything off-grid. There's a cultural perception where the idea is that people need a relief from all the sensing or the amount of intrusion. And so therefore, by not having Wi-Fi, not having any form of electronic communication, more physicality, actually will give people of all ages a more, shall we say, enjoyable recreational experience. Now, that would create a black hole. It would create a black hole in an urban area, but I'm just wondering what your views are on that.
We're just taking it in for a moment, okay?
I mean, one of the fundamental parts of the way that we engage with any of the visitors or other people that we engage with is these different ways of interacting with the world that all have intrinsic values. So having Wi-Fi, having that information at your fingertips is super valuable. But to build the other competencies that we need to interact with the world, I think having kinesthetic experiences, having experiences that delight, I love that. Those are super, super important. So I think there's a balance to be struck there. But if we're looking to create environments and have an engaged citizenry, we need to have the opportunities for us to develop in all the different capacities and create those opportunities in our public spaces.
Okay. Naheed, I wonder, Information-Free Friday, how about
one
that?
very specific thing, which is, as much as I think my family and friends would love to take me there and maybe leave me there, one very prosaic thing about it is that one of my most important jobs is emergency response. And I don't just mean I have to be around so people can tell me if there's a fire. I have to be able to have the best information I can get so that my first responders can deal with emergencies. And so that's my only concern, frankly, of the whole thing, is that if something bad happens, my emergency responders need to be able to get there, and they need to be able to communicate while they're there, and they need to be able to absorb as much information as they can while they're there. You can solve that problem, way to go.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment? Okay. Is your experiment or your approach, I mean, is it being trialed, and are there any results, or are you just kind of posing an impish thought in an innovation heartland?
We're at the planning stage at the moment, and we're looking into the practicalities of boots on the ground, etc., because it's all about scale. If you do it in an urban area, it's easier, depending on the size of the block, than it is in a rural area.
Okay, I'm going to take one more, and then we're going to move forward. The gentleman who had the microphone ripped from his hand earlier.
Okay, I'm Tommy Shah from Newton North High School. So I want to ask, how would you prevent from getting too responsive to provide too much information so that it doesn't get overwhelmed by the massive information?
Who wants to offer one there? Adam.
I mean, I would say that we're already getting overwhelmed by the massive amounts of information to some degree. But I think as long as we keep it grounded, as I was talking about before, so as we're getting the data and doing that synthesis work in whatever our field and our industry is, because there's so much of it, making sure that it's grounded in the community and the folks that you're trying to impact, that's gonna be what allows, that's like the guiding light that lets you utilize whatever tools you have at your disposal. So that would be how I would address it.
Any other comments?
I'll just share. I think it's a great question, and I think there's infinite capacities to sense and provide data, and there's finite capacity to decide and dedicate resources to decisions. So the example I often give in this kind of case is, you're only going to decide usually what to wear in the morning. It doesn't matter how fine-grained data you have on weather or temperature throughout the day. And I think similarly, understanding what the response and decision mechanisms are and using that as a way to filter the data coming in might be one way to think about it.
Okay.
And just very quickly, I think that is an incredibly insightful question. And coming from someone in the millennial generation, I love that you're asking that because we live in this world. And I just want to briefly say, I'm also a university professor when I'm not being mayor. And one of the things that I think is really important is the concept of information literacy. and understanding that when you are covered in information, you have to be able to critically analyze it and figure out what's important. It's something I try to teach in my classroom when I'm in the classroom, but it's something that every citizen needs to know as well. Because you're exactly right. When there is too much information, people can easily focus on things that are not relevant to the decision making and make the decision extremely difficult. I've got a real quick situation right now where we're building a bus rapid transit way, a bus lane in a particular road. There happens to be a high pressure gas pipeline adjacent to that road. We build stuff in and around high pressure gas pipelines all the time. But because people know that that's there and there's signs saying high pressure gas pipeline, there's all this fear in the community that somehow we're going to build a road that's just going to explode one day. And it's really hard for me to say to people, you know, we generally don't build roads that explode. It's not good public policy. But how do we focus people on that? It's a very open question.
Okay. Fascinating session. Thank you. There'll be a microphone coming even now.
So in Davos this year, the mayor was very kind to tell us about how people can get a free bus ride if they give him information.
Oh.
So I'm wondering if you could just tell everyone about it, because I think it's a great idea.
Thanks, Alice. She's giving me a softball. Remember when I said go to people where they live? And so the idea is don't expect people to come to an open house where you've set up trifolds from a science fair and, you know, they have to get a sitter, they've got to find time, they've got to be able to come. Get to them electronically, certainly, but go to places where they are. And one of my favorite examples of this is imagine you're standing at the bus stop in the morning waiting for your bus. And instead of your regular bus coming, a very colorful bus that's covered in Post-it notes comes to the stop. And if you're lucky enough to have that bus come, you don't have to pay your fare that day. You get a free ride. But in return for your free ride, you have to talk to my colleagues from the City of Calgary who are on the bus about whatever it is they're trying to engage citizens on today. It's called the Engagement Bus. We used it originally for developing our new transit network, but now we use it all the time just to talk to people in their everyday environment about what they would like the city to do more or less of.
We love it. And there haven't been any marriages result of people getting the wrong idea about the engagement bus?
No, my Uber pool ride last night turned out to be filmed and live cast on the internet, which I found a bit disconcerting. Yeah. But it was a bit of a party.
Fantastic. And I'm just going to ask one thing. Fascinating discussion, but if there was just looking forward over the next 5 years, responsive environments, all the rest of it, if each of you were to give me a one-liner message that would be ringing in our ears as we actually go off to have a quick discussion, what would that be related to responsive environment? This is an audience with quite a few techies in it who are trying to work out what to provide, sensors, all the rest of it, also city leaders, all the rest of it. Give me a one-liner message that is a kind of take-home for people from this conversation. Zia, that'll teach you to be at the far end of the thing.
Sure, I guess what I would throw out is, in the same way that we think of public space as a public good, we're going to have to start looking at data as a public good. And that has lots of implications.
Thank you. Nahid?
No surprise. Use the best information from the best experts. That means use the best information from citizens.
Okay, thanks. Tom? Oh, no, I'll do Adam first. You make it.
I would say, yeah, use your local experts to help you as a filter for all the other information that you're getting.
Okay.
Again, in the concept of voice, what I would really like to know, because it changes city by city, is I'd like to understand what to consume by what the city can actually handle.
Interesting. Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, fantastic panel. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And you may want to...